The day my mother told me to pack my things so my pregnant sister could have my room, I didn't argue. I just left. 6 months later, when she lost the house to foreclosure, I bought it at auction. Then came the 33 missed calls. She didn't recognize me as the highest bidder until it was too late. Here's what happens when the daughter you train to be independent becomes the one you can't control. My sister was always the favorite, but I didn't realize how deep that ran until her pregnancy turned into my eviction. My mother chose an unborn grandchild over the daughter she already had. I packed a bag and found a studio apartment that smelled like cigarettes and regret. Meanwhile, my sister got the master bedroom, new furniture, and all the help she needed. The house they both lived in, the one I grew up in, started falling apart 6 months later. Mortgages don't care about favoritism, and when the bank came calling, I was the only one who showed up with a check. But here's the part nobody saw coming. I didn't want the house for revenge. I wanted it for proof. I was 8 years old the first time I realized my mother's love came with a price tag, and I wasn't the one she was shopping for. My sister, Claire, was 6. She wanted a dollhouse, the one with the working lights and the tiny furniture that cost more than our grocery budget. My mother bought it the same day. I asked for a new backpack because mine had a broken zipper. She told me to use a trash bag until payday. That moment set the pattern. Claire got the best cuts of meat at dinner. I got the leftovers. Claire got new clothes for the first day of school. I got hand-me-downs from a cousin I'd never met. My father noticed, but he worked double shifts and came home too tired to argue. He'd ruffle my hair and say, "You're tough, kid. You'll be fine." Those words became my inheritance. By the time I was 16, I'd learned to stop asking. I worked weekends at a diner, saved every tip, paid for my own phone, my own shoes, my own school supplies. My mother never asked where the money came from. She just stopped buying me things and called it independence. Then Claire got pregnant at 19. Not planned, not stable, but in my mother's eyes, it was a miracle. She decorated the spare room with fresh paint and a crib my father had to put on a credit card. The problem was there wasn't enough space. The spare room was also my room. "I need the room for the baby," my mother told me one Tuesday evening, standing in my doorway. "You can sleep on the couch until you figure something out." I had a bed. I had a dresser full of clothes I'd bought myself. I had a desk where I did homework between shifts, and she wanted me to give it up so Claire could have a nursery. "When?" I asked. "By Saturday." 3 days. I called a friend who knew someone with a studio for rent. Dirty windows, no heat in the bathroom, but it was cheap. I packed everything I owned into garbage bags, the same kind my mother had told me to use for my backpack years before. I didn't say goodbye when I left. I just walked out the front door and didn't look back. That was April. By June, the novelty of Claire's pregnancy had worn off. My mother was covering Claire's rent because the baby's father had disappeared. The credit card bills piled up. The mortgage payment became a negotiation. My father was working 70 hours a week just to keep the lights on, but nobody called me. Nobody asked where I was living or if I was eating. I was eating. I was working 2 jobs. I was taking community college classes at night because I refused to let my life stop because my family had forgotten I existed. July came with a notice. A pink slip taped to the front door of the house I'd grown up in. Foreclosure proceedings had begun. My mother called me for the first time in 3 months, not to check on me, to tell me they were losing everything. "You need to help," she said, her voice cracked. "We're going to lose the house." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I live in a studio with a hot plate." "Get a loan, borrow from your friends. You're good at figuring things out." Figuring things out. There it was again. The compliment that meant I was on my own. I told her I'd see what I could do, which was nothing, because I had no credit, no cosigner, and no desire to throw myself into a debt I hadn't created. But I started paying attention. I learned about foreclosure auctions. I learned that the bank would sell the house to the highest bidder at a courthouse step sale. I learned that most people don't show up to those auctions. I learned that sometimes properties go for far less than market value. I learned that the redemption period in my state was 90 days. If I could buy the house at auction, I would own it outright. All I needed was the money. I worked 50 hours a week for the next 5 months. I picked up extra shifts at a warehouse, did rideshare in the evenings, tutored high school kids on weekends. I ate ramen and rice and told myself that every dollar saved was a step toward owning the front door I'd been pushed out of. By December, I had $15,000. Not enough for a house in most markets, but maybe enough for a starting bid at a foreclosure sale where nobody else showed up. The auction was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in January. The temperature was below freezing. I stood outside the county courthouse with a cashier's check in my coat pocket, watching the few other bidders shiver and stamp their feet. The list of properties went up at 9 a.m. My childhood home was number 7. The starting bid was $12,000. My hands shook when I raised my number. A man in a gray suit bid 13. I went to 14. He dropped out. The auctioneer looked at me, looked at the room, and said, "Going once, going twice, sold to bidder 44. That was me. I walked out of the courthouse holding a receipt that said I owned the house. I had exactly $32 left in my checking account, but I owned the house. My mother found out 3 hours later when a neighbor called to congratulate her. She called me screaming, "How dare you? That's our house. Your father's house. You had no right." I didn't scream back. I said, "It's my house now, and I'd like my key back." The missed calls started immediately, 33 of them over the next 2 days. My mother, my sister, my aunt, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, each one telling me I'd done something unforgivable, each one asking me to sign the house back. I ignored every single one, but I knew I couldn't ignore them forever. Because on day 3, my mother showed up at my studio apartment door with a suitcase and a story about how she had nowhere else to go. And that's when the real war began. She stood in my doorway with a suitcase in one hand and a guilt trip in the other. I had $32 left to my name, but I owned the house she was standing in. "I have nowhere else to go," my mother said. Her voice was thin, worn. "The bank changed the locks this morning. Your father left. Claire is at a shelter." I let the words hang in the cold air between us. Part of me wanted to slam the door. Another part remembered that this woman once held me when I was sick, even if she held my sister closer. "Come in," I said. She sat on my second-hand couch, the one with the spring poking through the cushion. She told me the whole story. The foreclosure had been finalized. My father had walked out 2 weeks earlier. Claire's baby was due in 3 months, and the father had never returned. They had lost everything. But she kept repeating one sentence like it was a lifeline. "At least you have the house now." I didn't correct her. I didn't say I have the house because the truth was more complicated. The house came with back taxes, a broken furnace, and a roof that leaked when it rained. I had spent my last dollar on the auction deposit. I had no money for repairs, no credit for a loan, and no way to live in a house that was technically mine but practically unlivable. "You can stay here tonight," I said, "but I need you to understand something. I didn't buy that house to hurt you. I bought it because I had nowhere else to go either." She nodded, but I saw the calculation behind her eyes. She was already planning how to get back in, how to make this temporary arrangement permanent. The next morning, I woke up to find her on the phone in my tiny kitchen, whispering. I heard my sister's name. I heard the words, "We'll figure it out." When she saw me, she hung up fast. "Claire wants to see you," she said. "She wants to apologize." I knew better, but I agreed to meet. The coffee shop was neutral ground. Claire looked different. The pregnancy had drained her. Dark circles under her eyes, a cheap jacket that barely fit. She was holding a baby bump like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I'm sorry," she said, not looking at me. "I didn't ask Mom to kick you out, she just did it." "But you didn't stop it." I was scared. I had nowhere else to go. Neither did I. Silence stretched, then she dropped the real request. "Can we move into the house? Just until I have the baby. I'll leave after, I promise." I looked at my sister, the same sister who had gotten new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs, the same sister who had a nursery while I slept on a friend's floor. She was asking me to trust her one more time. I said no. She cried. My mother called me an hour later, furious. How can you be so cruel? She's your sister. She's pregnant." I hung up. I stared at the ceiling of my studio apartment and wondered if I was the villain in this story. But then I got the letter. It came certified mail, from a law firm I'd never heard of. The letter stated that my mother had taken out a second mortgage on the house 6 months before the foreclosure. A $20,000 loan. She had used the money to pay off credit cards and buy Claire a car. The loan was secured against the property, which meant that even though I owned the house at auction, the second mortgage was still a lien. I now owed $20,000 to a lender I had never spoken to. My mother had hidden a debt on a house she was losing, and she had let me buy it without telling me. That's when the lens shifted. This wasn't about favoritism. This was about fraud. I went to the county recorder's office. I pulled the documents myself. The loan was signed 3 weeks before the first foreclosure notice. My mother's signature was on the dotted line, but the loan application listed my father's income as if he was still employed. He had been laid off 2 months before that date. The application was fraudulent. I had 2 choices. I could report the fraud and risk my mother facing criminal charges, or I could pay the $20,000 and pretend it never happened. I chose option 3. I called the lawyer who had sent the letter. The lawyer was a woman named Sandra Reeves. She specialized in foreclosure disputes and mortgage fraud. I told her the whole story. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her pen and said something I will never forget. "You didn't buy a house, you bought a lawsuit." She explained that the second mortgage could be contested because it was obtained through fraud. If I could prove that my mother knowingly submitted false information, the lien could be invalidated. But proving it would require a legal fight, and that legal fight would require nomming my mother as the responsible party. I asked what would happen if I did nothing. She said the lender would eventually foreclose on the lien, and I would lose the house anyway. I had 3 months to decide. I walked out of her office with a folder full of legal documents and a new understanding. My mother hadn't just favored my sister. She had mortgaged my future to fund my sister's comfort, and she didn't even think twice. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Claire. I went back to my studio apartment, sat on my broken couch, and looked at the certified letter again. The due date for the first payment was in 2 weeks. I didn't have the money. But I had power. For the first time in my life, I had leverage. And I was about to use it. I called my mother and told her I knew about the loan. Her silence told me everything. She had planned this long before I ever stepped foot in that courthouse. "Where did you think the money would come from?" she finally said. Her voice was cold now, not desperate. "You bought the house. You inherited the debt. That's how these things work." "That's not how fraud works, Mom." She laughed, a hollow sound I'd never heard before. "Fraud? You think anyone cares about paperwork when a family is falling apart? I did what I had to do." I asked the question I was afraid to answer myself. "Did you know I was going to buy the house?" Silence again, then 3 words that broke something inside me. "I hoped you would." She had set the trap before I even knew there was a game. She had taken out that loan knowing she would lose the house, knowing I would try to save it, knowing the debt would follow me like a shadow. She had used my own independence against me. I hung up. I didn't cry. I sat very still and let the realization settle. My mother wasn't just careless or selfish. She was strategic. She had been playing a long game, and I was the piece she had sacrificed to keep her own life afloat. The next morning, I went back to Sandra Reeves' office. I laid out the phone call, the confession, the whole ugly picture. Sandra listened, then pushed a document across her desk. "This is a petition to contest the lien based on fraudulent misrepresentation," she said. "If you file this, the court will schedule a hearing. Your mother will be summoned. She will have to testify under oath about the loan application. What happens to her if she lies?" Sandra didn't blink. "That's perjury. It carries potential jail time." I stared at the petition. Signing it meant I was willing to send my mother to court, maybe to prison. Not signing it meant I was accepting $20,000 of debt I didn't create. "There's something else," Sandra said. She opened a second file. I ran a background check on the property title. There's a third lien, a home equity line of credit taken out 2 years ago. Your mother defaulted on that one too. The lender wrote it off as a loss, but the debt was sold to a collection agency. They can't come after the house because the lien was discharged in bankruptcy, but they can come after you personally if they can prove you assumed the debt. Did I assume it? The auction purchase included the property, as is, with all existing encumbrances. The home equity line was technically discharged, but the paperwork is ambiguous. A clever lawyer could argue you accepted it by buying the house. I felt the floor shift beneath me. My mother had not just taken out one fraudulent loan. She had bled the house dry over years. The walls I grew up in were held together by debt and deception, and now that debt had my name on it. I signed the petition. 2 weeks later, the court date was set. My mother was served at the shelter where Claire was staying. She called me 12 times that night. I answered the 13th call. "You're really doing this," she said, not a question. "You left me no choice." I could tell the judge you knew about the loan before you bought the house. "You could, but that would be perjury, and I have the phone records showing you never told me." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father wants to talk to you." I hadn't heard from my father since he walked out. He got on the line. His voice sounded older, smaller. "Your mother made mistakes," he said, "but she's still your mother. You don't have to destroy her." Destroy her? She tried to destroy me. She buried me in debt so she could buy your other daughter a car. She was scared. We were all scared. I was 8 years old the first time I realized I wasn't the favorite. I've been scared my whole life. You know what I did? I worked. I saved. I showed up at a courthouse alone and bought a house nobody else wanted. I didn't defraud anyone. I didn't abandon my family. I survived. Silence. Then my father said something that cut deeper than anything my mother had said. "You were always the strong one. We knew you'd be fine." There it is again, the compliment that means I don't matter. I hung up. I turned off my phone. I sat in the dark and waited for the court date. The morning of the hearing, I wore the same jacket I had worn to the auction. It was the only nice thing I owned. The courthouse was the same one where I had raised my bitter number. Full circle. My mother was already there. She sat on a wooden bench with her hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Claire was next to her, holding her belly like a shield. My father was not there. The judge called the case. Sandra Reeves presented the evidence, the loan application, the false income statement, the timeline showing my mother signed it after my father was laid off, the recording of my phone call where she admitted she hoped I would buy the house. My mother's lawyer argued that she was under financial duress and did not intend to defraud anyone. The judge listened. Then he looked at my mother. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" My mother stood. She straightened her blouse. She looked directly at me. "I did what I had to do to take care of my family," she said. "You may not understand that because you've only ever taken care of yourself." The words landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes on hers and said, "I took care of myself because you made sure nobody else would." The judge ruled in my favor. The lien was invalidated. The debt was discharged. My mother was ordered to pay court costs, which she could not afford, which meant the state would garnish what little income she had. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The sun was bright. I had won. I owned the house free and clear, no debt, no liens, no strings. But I felt no victory. I felt empty. That night I drove to the house. My house now. The key still worked. I walked through the empty rooms. The nursery wallpaper my mother had put up for Claire was still on the walls. My old bedroom was bare, just the indentation of furniture on the carpet. I stood in the living room where I had learned to read, where I had watched my mother kiss my sister's scraped knees while I bandaged my own. I stood there and understood something I had been running from my whole life. The house was never the prize. The house was the battlefield. I had won the war, but I had lost the only thing I actually wanted. A family that would have chosen me first. I locked the door and drove back to my studio apartment. The broken couch was still there. The hot plate was still there, but something had changed. The weight I had carried for 23 years, the weight of trying to prove I was worthy of love, was gone. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had something better. I had proof. The next morning, I put the house on the market. Not because I needed the money, because I needed to let go. And that's when everything really got interesting. Because my mother had one final move left, and I never saw it coming. The house went on the market on a Thursday. By Friday, my mother had found a buyer willing to pay cash. The only problem, she didn't own the house anymore. I got the call from my real estate agent, a woman named Patricia who sounded confused. "There's a woman claiming to be your mother. She brought a potential buyer to the property this morning. She let them inside. They want to make an offer." "How did she get in?" "She used a key, said she still lived there." I had changed the locks the week before, but my mother had installed those locks originally. She had kept a spare. I had forgotten about the spare. I drove to the house. My mother was on the front porch talking to a couple in their 40s. The husband was nodding. The wife was taking notes on her phone. My mother saw my car and straightened her back. I walked up the steps. "I need to talk to you, alone." She excused herself. The couple stepped back, looking uncertain. "You can't do this," I said quietly. "You don't own this house." "I'm helping you sell it. That's what families do. They help each other." "You broke in." "I used a key. It's not breaking in if you have a key." I looked at her. She was so calm, so certain. She had convinced herself she was in the right. "The buyer is a nice couple," she continued. "They have 2 kids. They want to fix up the place. I told them you'd take $300,000. That's more than you paid." "I'm not selling to someone you found." "Why not? Are you going to live here? You haven't stepped foot in this house since you bought it. You're just trying to hurt me." She wasn't wrong. I had put the house on the market because I didn't want to live in a place that held 19 years of resentment. But I wasn't about to let her control the sale. "I'll handle the sale myself," I said. "You're not involved." "I'm your mother. You're the reason I had to buy it in the first place." She stared at me. For a second, I saw something crack behind her eyes. Not remorse, not understanding, just the realization that she had lost control. "Fine," she said. She walked down the steps, past the confused couple, and got into a car I didn't recognize. She drove away without looking back. The couple apologized. I apologized. They left. I stood on the front porch of the house I owned and felt nothing. Except I did feel something. A tiny, stubborn thread of hope that maybe this could still be fixed. Maybe if I just gave her another chance, she would change. I called her that night. She didn't answer. I left a message. "I'm sorry for how that went. I don't want to fight. I want us to be a family, but I can't do it if you keep trying to take from me." She never called back. 2 weeks passed. The real estate agent brought legitimate buyers. I accepted an offer for $280,000. Closing was set for 30 days. The week before closing, I got a call from the title company. There was a problem. A mechanic's lien had been filed against the property. Someone was claiming I owed them $10,000 for roof repairs done 3 years ago. I called Sandra Reeves again. She pulled the records. The roof work had been done when my mother still owned the house. The contractor had never been paid. He had filed a lien years ago, but it had expired. Someone had renewed it. "Who can renew a mechanic's lien?" I asked. "The original contractor, or someone with power of attorney for the property owner at the time of the work." I knew the answer before I asked the next question. Could my mother have done it? If she had power of attorney for herself during that period, yes. But she'd need to sign as the property owner. And she hasn't owned the property for months. Unless she forged something. Sandra was quiet. That would be a crime. I drove to the county recorder's office. I pulled the lien renewal document. The signature was my mother's name. The notary stamp belonged to a woman who had been convicted of fraud 2 years ago and lost her license. The house sale was frozen. The buyer's financing fell through. I lost the contract. And my mother had vanished. Claire called me 2 days later, crying. "Mom showed up at my shelter. She said you were trying to send her to prison. She took my baby's things. She said she needed money to leave town. I told Claire what had happened. The lien, the forged signature, the lost sale. Claire was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "She told me you were the one trying to steal the house from her. She's been lying to you." "I know," Claire's voice broke. "I've known for years, I just didn't want to believe it." That was the first conversation my sister and I had ever had without the shadow of our mother between us. We met the next day. She brought the baby, a little girl with dark eyes who looked nothing like either of us. Claire apologized, not the half apology from the coffee shop, the real kind. The kind that comes with tears and shaking hands. "I'm sorry I let her push you out. I'm sorry I never told her to stop. I was scared. I thought if I didn't go along with her, I'd end up like you. Like me. Alone, cut off. She always said you were selfish, that you didn't care about family. I believed her because it was easier than admitting she was the selfish one." I held my niece, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. Claire wasn't the golden child. She was the prisoner. My mother had kept her close by making her dependent. She had given her everything so Claire would never learn to stand on her own. And when Claire needed her most, my mother had taken her baby's things and run. I didn't forgive Claire, not yet, but I understood her. I tracked down my mother. It took 5 days. She had moved to a motel 2 towns over. She was living on cash. She had sold Claire's baby things at a pawn shop. I didn't go alone. I brought the police report Sandra had filed. I brought the forged lien document. I brought a copy of the court ruling that said I owned the house free and clear. She opened the motel door. She was wearing a robe. Her hair was unwashed. She looked like a stranger. "I'm not here to have you arrested," I said. "I'm here to give you a choice." "What choice?" "You leave for good. You stop contacting me, Claire, or anyone else in the family. You sign a document admitting to the fraud, and I won't press charges." "And if I don't?" "Then I press charges. The lien forgery alone is enough for 2 years. The fraudulent loan application is another charge. You'll go to prison." She sat on the edge of the motel bed. She looked at the paperwork. She looked at me. "You always were the strong one," she said. The same line, the same dismissal. "This time it's not a compliment," I said. "It's a warning." She signed. I walked out of that motel room and drove to the house one last time. The sale had fallen through, but I had a new buyer. A young couple who saw past the broken furnace and the leaky roof. They saw a home. I signed the papers. I handed over the keys. I walked out the front door and closed it behind me. And I didn't look back. 6 months later, Claire got a job. She found an apartment. She started paying her own bills for the first time in her life. We met for coffee every 2 weeks. The baby called me Auntie. It felt strange and good. My mother never contacted me again. I heard through a cousin that she had moved out of state. She was living with a man no one had met. She told people I had stolen her house. Let her, I know the truth. And here is the final detail that still surprises me, the one I didn't see coming even at the end. A year after the sale, I got a letter, no return address. Inside was a single key, the key to the house I had just sold, and a note in my mother's handwriting. "You were right, I was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to have this. It was the only thing I ever gave you that was yours, and you gave it back to me. Keep it." I still have the key. I don't know what it opens. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But I know this. The strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who only see your strength as a reason to take from you. And the bravest thing you can do is leave the door open, just enough for the people who love you to find their way back. So if you're watching this, and you've ever been the one who always had to figure it out on your own, I want you to hear me clearly. Your strength was never meant to be a resource for other people to drain. The very thing they used to justify neglecting you, your independence, your resilience, your ability to survive without their help, that is not a flaw. That is a superpower they handed you by accident. My mother spent 23 years convincing me that love was conditional, that the more I gave, the more I had to be grateful for the crumbs. She was wrong. Love doesn't take. Love doesn't keep score. Love doesn't hide a second mortgage behind your name and call it family. Walking away from that house was the hardest thing I ever did. Not because I loved the building, but because letting go of the dream that my family would ever become what I needed felt like cutting off a part of myself. But here is the truth I learned. You cannot hold onto a ghost and still have room for something real. Claire and I, we are not fixed. We are learning. She is learning what it means to stand on her own. I am learning that forgiveness is not a single moment. It is a decision you make every day to not let the past write your future. And my mother, I don't know if she will ever understand. Some people are so lost in their own story that they cannot see the damage they leave behind. That is not my burden to carry anymore. If this story reaches you on a day when you are standing at your own front door, wondering if you have the strength to walk away or the courage to stay, I hope you remember this. You are not too much. You are not selfish for wanting to be chosen. You are not the villain for refusing to be used. The key she sent me still sits in a drawer by my bed. I don't know what it opens. Maybe it was her way of saying she understood, even if she could never say the words. Maybe it was just another manipulation. But I choose to believe it was a beginning. Because the bravest thing you can do is not just walk away. It is to leave the door unlocked, just in case someone you love finds their way home. If this story hit close to home, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their strength is not a weakness. And remember, the next time someone tells you that you are too independent, smile and say thank you. They just reminded you who you really are. I will see you in the next story.